There is so much talk about women's hormonal health, which is great. But even though it's a bigger part of the conversation, most women are left even more confused about what it means for them and what to do about it, which is not so great. This confusion ends now. An award-winning German nutrition scientist created a powerful herbal formula called Hormone Harmony, which combines 12 powerful adaptogens into one single capsule. Each of these ingredients is carefully selected based on scientific evidence, and it's been proven effective in clinical studies for women of various ages and hormonal profiles. And Happy Mammoth, the company that produces Hormone Harmony, is famous for its zero-compromise policy. No GMOs, artificial fillers or flavors, or any other junk. Only science-backed ingredients in amounts that are clinically proven. The company surveyed over 1,500 women to see how Hormone Harmony helped them, and the results are mind-blowing. 86% of women started losing weight, 77% say it improved their mood, and 100% said they're feeling like themselves again. Hormone Harmony has over 50,000 raving reviews from women all over the world, with 98% of them saying they'd gladly recommend it to their friends and family. For a limited time, you can get 15% off on your entire first order at happymammoth.com. Just use the code HAPPYME, HAPPYME, at checkout. That's code HAPPYME at happymammoth.com for 15% off your entire first order.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Hi, everyone. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to acknowledge that I know there's a lot of listeners in the United States, and I know that there's a lot of horrifying things happening in the United States right now, and I just wanted to say that so everybody knows. Right now in the United States, the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, has been overseeing a mass deportation campaign affecting hundreds of thousands of people through detentions, confinements, and expulsions. Their stated goal is to arrest 3,000 people per day. To attain this number, people are being taken from public places like churches, schools, and hospitals. The people being targeted are predominantly from a Hispanic background. Families are being separated, and people are living in fear. This is a horrific campaign affecting people all across America. I want to highlight some organizations working to help those being affected. Today, I want to highlight El Otro Lado. El Otro Lado, which means to the other side, provides holistic legal and humanitarian support to refugees, deportees, and other migrants in the U.S. and Tijuana through a multidisciplinary, client-centered, harm reduction-based practice. This includes helping migrants with legal aid. They also have a water drop program where volunteers go deep into the desert to leave care packages for migrants that might pass through. You can donate to support their work at elotrolado.org. That's ALOTROLADO.org. And enjoy today's episode. So welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this season we've been looking at, recently, the French Revolution and all those guys. And it was the same when we looked at the American Revolution. They're all just like, let's be like ancient Rome. We should all be like ancient Rome. Even the women were like, women in ancient Rome, we should be like them. And I'm just like, well, what was ancient Rome like? I've never really looked into it, but I know someone who has looked into it a lot. And that is our recurring guest star, Gina Berry. Welcome, Gina.
Hey, girl. Hey.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. Listeners, if you haven't heard one of the Gina episodes before, like you're in for a ride. This is going to be a part 1 and a part 2, because once we get talking, like we've both blocked off the whole afternoon to record this. So welcome, Gina. Tell everybody about your fascination with ancient Rome and how it started.
It really started probably, I'd say like mid-20s for me. I realized just how much I liked to know. And so I was like, well, what can I know? What kind of information is out there? What can I learn? And I started finding a lot of information on ancient Rome because, as you said, everyone is always, let's be like Rome. So, I decided, let me start digging into ancient Rome. And there's just so much information out there because they wrote everything in Latin, and we can translate Latin a lot easier than we can other ancient languages. And they kept details of everything. Whether true or not, I can't say. But
we'll get into that.
Yes,
we'll get into that.
But they kept details of everything, like just detailed details of everything, like names and who begot who and when they were born and when they died. And so it was just so easily accessible to me. And I just dove into it. And it was just seeing the parallels of that society compared to our society today. Even some of the building structures, a lot of the government buildings, they have the pillars to them. Well, if you look at the ancient Roman buildings, they had the pillars to them, the Senate and whatnot. So I was fascinated by it. Obviously, I don't know if I have any ancient Roman ancestors. It's very possible. It's possible most of us do.
Well, they spread, like, we don't need to get into the geography of it all. I feel like most of us do because, like, at its peak, the ancient Roman Empire was, like, all of Western Europe, like, getting into Eastern Europe, like, getting into Northern Africa. It's like everyone listening to this has one ancestor from one of those places.
Probably, at least, yes.
Probably,
So
right? And, like, the Romans were there.
It's crazy how far they expanded. And that expansion actually was the beginning of their downfall, but that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I enjoyed what I read. A lot of it was infuriating. And we will get into some of the reasons of why it was infuriating, but a lot of it was just really very interesting on how they came up with some of the ideas that they did and how they enforced them, how they didn't enforce some others because it was more of a benefit to them to not enforce them in certain situations. So it just, all the way around, it was interesting to me. But I had always heard a phrase, growing up, that if you don't know where you came from, then how can you make anything better now? You have to understand, you have to learn from the past, or you continue to make those same mistakes. And so that was another thing that I really wanted to see is, what types of things happened back then? What, contributed to downfalls of different societies? What contributed to their expansion? And what are we doing the same today? What are we doing different today? And Rome really should be a cautionary tale for everyone. It's not, because everyone just wants to focus on Julius Caesar and all his conquests. No one wants to focus on where he screwed up, where Rome in general screwed up. So I look at both sides. What was your conquest? But where did you screw up? And even though, I'm not running the government, it would be much better if I did.
Oh, my God.
If I was running the government, I would have learned from those mistakes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, It doesn't look like any society in the history of man is ever going to change. We're just going to continue to make the same mistakes. But I'd like to know what I could probably prepare myself for, because, that happened towards the end of that civilization. This is kind of looking like that. So how do I prepare for that? So
no, this is like, I saw somebody posting somewhere on social media. They were like, was the fall of Rome this dumb? And and every historian who saw that was like, yes.
Yes.
like I think a lot, because so many like politicians and military leaders and whatever have been like, oh yeah, ancient Rome, that's the greatest thing. It's like people focused on, just like you said, like the conquest and stuff, where it's like, but what was actually happening? Like they wrote all these records, but it's like, that's what you want. It's like you look at the newspaper today. It's like, well, that's what you want people to think happened, but like what actually was happening? And what's happening was just like a lot of messy people making it up as they went along, making bad decisions. Like they were not these perfect gods. It seems like a lot of people are like, let's just be like Rome again. It's like, no, man, no. That didn't work out for them. Why do you think it's going to work out for us?
Exactly. So, once I started getting my fill of that is when I, and really kind of what probably pushed me towards it is when I got to the point in time of Cleopatra's entrance into Roman history. And I was like, okay, but who is she? So then I started digging into that. I'm like, okay, she's a Ptolemy, though. She's not really Egyptian. And I've talked about this, too.
Yeah, listeners, if you want to hear me and Gina talk about Cleopatra for another 3 hours, like just scroll back through your app and you'll find that episode.
So I was like, okay, but I want to know what the real ancient Egyptians were like. And that's what really made me dive into that. And I have to say that I've pretty much put everything else on the back burner and just really just absorbed as much as I could about ancient Egypt. I looked a little bit into ancient Greece because I know Romans really valued the ancient Greeks, learned how to read their language, even try to fashion some of their society around what they did. So I learned a little bit about that. But beyond the Zeus and Hercules and all of that, it just didn't interest me. I like the mythology of Greece much better than the actuality of Greece. I like the actuality of Rome. I couldn't really tell you too much about the mythology because that didn't interest me as much. When it comes to Egypt, it all interests me. I want to know about all of it.
So this is where like you're on here today. So you're just kind of like brushing off that like your former obsession about ancient Rome. But I'm so excited to talk about all this with you because I know a bit about ancient Rome just from like some episodes I've done on the podcast. Like when we were talking about Cleopatra, I had to learn more about Julius Caesar and stuff. But yeah, just like the society itself and especially the role of women and I know you did your research and I did my research. And like at the end of this, like I'll put all the names of all the sources we looked at. But I would say starting in maybe like the 1970s is like when people started looking more at like the role of women and what were they actually like in ancient Rome. And up until then, from, the year, whatever, 0 before that, up until the 1970s, it was like, here's these great men and here's what they did. And the women were bitches who were scheming or just like
completely insignificant. Yep.
just like overly sexualized monsters.
Yes.
That's what women were, but let's look at the men. But I would say like after like, there's so much like, I see this in every era I look at. In the 1970s, feminist scholars started getting into universities and doing research on women. And since then, and then I think especially like starting in the early 2000s, just people are really trying to put women back into this story because you can't understand a civilization if you're only looking at half of the people who lived in it.
So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And you really can't look at a civilization and not look at the people that actually, I don't know, the ones that actually kept the civilization going. Because last time I checked, men can't produce babies. So you got to look at the whole of a civilization to really, truly understand it. And even though in every society, for the most part, they've always tried to completely downplay the woman's role in it. But without women, those men wouldn't be out there conquering anything. Because number one, they gave birth to them. Number two, they kept them alive because the dads weren't around to raise them. Because that's just not how society has been for years. Men don't raise the kids. Number three, most of them, if you could go back in time and ask them, who was the person that you would probably go to first if you had some sort of major issue or decision you had to make, they would probably say, my mother. Women played such a huge role in all of history, yet they're the main character that is always being erased. And it's just been very refreshing that has been starting to get reversed here recently because the information is there. Like you said, the information is there because everyone kept documentation. I mean, it's even when they had to chisel it in stone. It's there. The documentation is there. Just take the time to study it. Take the time to read it. And I'm really glad that that's changing now because that just gives a so much better understanding of all these different civilizations.
I think it's also such a good example of something that I did my undergraduate degree in history. And so I was this little like 21-year-old going to this class about like the history of history. And it blew my mind then. And so I keep saying it on the podcast so people know where it's just like history was written by people with an agenda. Like there's no objective history. Every single fact that you've read, like somebody wrote that down, like in ancient Rome, somebody wrote down in Latin what they saw happen. And then somebody in like Victorian England translated that, but they chose what word, like it's talking about like the emperor's wife and like the word, it's a specific Latin word that can't really be translated, but one person chooses that to say she was nagging. But then another translator could be like, she was unreasonable. It's just kind of like, what word are we going to use? And that just sets people up to think about people in a certain way. And I mean, like, we won't get into this today, maybe another episode, the Bible, just like,
I was thinking the same thing.
how many, where it's just like, no language to language can be a direct word for word. Like you have to sort of like, here's kind of what they meant. Here's sort of the vibes of the word. And what word you're choosing depends on the biases of the translator.
Yep.
So already to look at this Roman history, it's like the biases of the person writing it down, the biases of the person translating it, And then you're looking at it and you're like, oh, wow, I guess this woman was like a nagging scold. But then you go back to the Latin and you're like, oh, no, this just says that she like had a loud voice or whatever. Like,
yeah. And it's funny you say that about the voice, because there's actually something that I found really interesting that we can get into when we start talking about the expectations of the women of ancient Rome. But it goes along with tone of voice and really how it would be interpreted by the person that was writing down the account of it. And so it's all fascinating. So we can start wherever you want to start, because there's a lot to put in there.
There's a lot to get in here. And that's where I was like, I told you before, I'm like, part one of this conversation is going to be like, let's just talk about Rome, baby. And then part two is going to be like the specific biography we're going to look at. But I think that'll help when we get to the biography, because we'll kind of know the context of what was happening. So, I mean, what you were just saying about like women and voices and stuff. And I find this really interesting too. So like recently it reminds me of the research I've been doing about the French Revolution, where at that time it was like, here's the expectation for women. And it's really similar to Rome. It's like they should be like quiet and demure and like domestic and motherly. And so they write that down, right? Being like, this is what women should be like. But then you read about the French Revolution and you're like, women were taking to the streets with knives, riots. Like, it's like, here's the expectation, but it's like, but here's the reality. So like, do you look at what people say women should be like, or do you look at like what the women are actually doing? And I have a sense that Rome was similar in a way where it's kind of like, oh, this is the expectation for women, but like behind the scenes, here's what they're actually doing.
Yeah. And it was so ingrained in everyone within the society of what the expectations were, that I think that unfortunately there was probably a number of women that really wanted to go against it, but really didn't see how they could. Because if you're told something from birth, you are most likely going to believe that that's just how it's supposed to be. There's no way around it. There's no getting out of it. And they made very sure that that is what was taught, boys and girls, but mostly girls. That was taught from day one, where it's just hammered into their head that this is what you should be, this is what you should do, this is what you cannot do. And so you only, out of 500 women, you'd have maybe two that was like, screw this, I'm doing something else. So they probably looked at it as, yes, we're always going to have an anomaly here. We're always going to have one that's going to buck the system. But out of 500, if it's only two, we can control two a lot better than we can 500. So, and that's just kind of the way society as a whole is still today, where, if you hold someone down long enough, they start to believe it. But you are going to have those rogue agents that are going to come out and be like, no. And that's really what happened. Well, it happened a lot in ancient Rome, but it's what happened with the French Revolution, where, not every woman in Rome or France was out there doing that, but you had enough of them where, they made enough noise. And so I think it was always the goal of the powers that be to limit the number of people that made noise, because you get enough women out there screaming, then there's going to be others that will be like, oh, wait, maybe I could be doing that. And they're going to get out there screaming. And just a fact of life is women outnumber men. So you get enough of us out there, the men don't stand a chance, They're bigger and stronger, but there's more of us.
Well, that's where I feel like the American Revolution or the French Revolution, places where they're like, we're looking to Rome. We want to be like Rome. It's like, okay. And Rome was a place where it was like women should be seen and not heard, and they should be limited to the domestic sphere. So it's like they were enforcing that part of Roman culture, as well in these kind of societies.
I know I read that the highborn women, the ladies that, they were the wives and daughters of the senators and legates and all of that. They studied singing to ensure that they had well modulated tones when speaking, and they studied dancing to make sure that they held the poise and the grace that society said these highborn women were supposed to have. That is why they studied these, not because they were interesting arts. They studied them because that was going to help them be the type of woman that these old men wanted them to be. Because, fact of the matter is up until probably the early 1900s, you always had a huge age gap between the man and the woman. The guy would be 40, the woman would be 15. So these older men, they had the idea of what sort of basically subservient type of woman that they wanted. And so they were like, well, these are the things we feel they need to do in order to ensure that we're going to have the wife that we want. Now, it doesn't really matter what I do. I'm going to be the hypocrite, and I'm going to go out, I'm going to visit the brothels, and I'm going to have my side piece, and I'm going to be sleeping with married women, unmarried women. I don't really care because I'm a dude and I can do what I want. But these women had to go through intensive training, basically, where they had to learn to sing, to speak properly. They had to learn to dance, to sit properly. They had to learn how to take care of the kids, how to run the household. They basically managed the finances of the house. The men didn't do that. The men basically generated the income and were hardly there because they were always out doing whatever they were doing, sitting in Senate, arguing with each other, whatever. The women really were the brains behind the society. They were the reason why it kept going because they maintained everything. The men just sat there and made their laws and their rules and yelled and screamed and went to war, and the women kept the city going. I mean, you can break it down to whatever level you want, but the overall, women kept the city going.
In terms of what you're saying, like with the high-born ladies, I just want to clarify for everybody and for myself, because you're teaching me. That's what this episode is about. But from what I understand, like the society was like, well, you mentioned it's like girls were raised this way, boys were raised this way. It was a very gendered society.
Extremely.
It was very much just like girls, boys. It's like there's no really discussion of like what's in the middle. But girls do this, boys do this. That's what society is like. And so people are just raised with those expectations. But then it's also really strict hierarchies in terms of class, because you've got like the highborn, you've got like there's enslaved people, but there's also freed people. Can you explain the sort of classes?
They were very, very class centric. I mean, everyone needed to know their place in society based off of that class. You had the lowest, which was probably the most utilized, but what was considered to be the lowest class, and that would be the prostitutes. Even though they were getting paid for what they were doing, and they had the highest of high men coming to see them on a regular basis, they were still considered to be the lowest class in the entirety of Roman history.
And is that because, I mean, probably lots of reasons. But part of that is like women should be this like perfect, morally upstanding, chaste, whatever. It's like, and these women were not that by virtue of their profession. So
right.
It's like,
and they were making money. If
they
at
rewarded them, yeah, they're making money at it. They were not doing like what women, quote unquote, should be doing. So the society is like, well, we can't show any value to that because then other women won't be the like chaste little trad wives we want.
Even the women that own the brothels, they were one of the few women in Rome that were allowed to actually own a business. Women weren't allowed to do that. They weren't allowed to enter into any kind of contracts, anything like that. So if you look at it from the woman's point of view, the ladies that own the brothels, man, those were the women to look up to because, I mean, they own small businesses. These women, they didn't answer to anyone. They were their own person. They had to follow the rules of the land, basically, but all in all, they were allowed to do what they wanted. They could spend their money how they wanted. They had money. I mean, they had more money sitting there usually than these high society women that kind of had to ask for money to do things. So, they were kind of looked at as being on the same class level as the prostitutes. But yet, I mean, think about it. These women were independent. To me, they ranked higher than that. And it's weird because they were actually ranked lower than the slaves. And slaves were just considered to be property. You could do anything you wanted to them. You could really do anything you wanted to the brothel owners and the prostitutes because, because they were so low class, they weren't allowed to prosecute anyone. So if they were raped, if anything got stolen, if they got beaten, whatever, if you killed their brother or whatever, there wasn't anything they could do because they didn't rank high enough in the class system to be able to prosecute you for anything. So they really probably had the most independent lives, yet the hardest lives because they really had to watch out for themselves in a way that the high society didn't. You weren't allowed to really do anything to someone that was in a higher class because you're going to get killed for doing that. These slaves and the brothel owners and the prostitutes, they weren't really looked at as being human. And so they really had to watch their back a lot because anyone could do anything to them at any time. And there was just never going to be any sort of penance for that.
And I want to clarify too, and maybe you've come across this in your research as well, but I was reading about how like the society was very gendered, but it was also very like these are the classes. So it's like if I am the brothel owner, it's like I couldn't just like go around and pretend that's not who I am. Like there was specific like ways that everybody dressed, and like if you were a sex worker, this like you wear your toga like
Yep.
this, and
Yep.
if you're a slave, you wear your toga like. So it's like just by looking at somebody on the street, which now you can't do that really. Like you could tell exactly the class because you had to dress this way. Yeah.
Because like married women were, they wore a specific dress called stola. No one else could wear that. Only a married woman could wear that. Unmarried, slave, prostitute, they were not allowed to wear those. If you were found wearing it and you shouldn't be, it's death upon you. You know, and it was, they were really very unforgiving in a lot of things back then. You know, if you accidentally stepped a toe outside of the class that you were a part of, you were most likely going to get killed. So that's how deeply rooted they were in their class system. And you had the plebeians who were kind of like, you would consider them just to be like the middle class today, where they just went about their business, they went about their lives. They had their jobs, they had their farms, they had whatever they had, but they, you know, they weren't sitting on a chair with someone fanning them. That's not the life they live. They were just, the plebeians were just the straight middle class. And there were a lot more of them than there was anything else from what I've read. Just like in today's world, there's a lot more middle class than there is of anything else, at least here in the United States. So, you know, that class wasn't looked at as poorly as the other classes, but they still didn't hold the rank that upper echelon did. And that class level would be pretty much compared to like your one percenters today. They would be considered your not necessarily millionaires. Well, maybe some of the millionaires, but they'd be your billionaire class of that higher. They were the senators. They were the ones in charge of the military, you know, all that kind of stuff, where they were the ones making the rules. They were the ones handing out the punishments for the lower class they felt weren't following the rules properly, that sort of thing. To be a senator, up until it turned into the emperor being there, that was about as high as you were going to get. That was anyone that was born into a higher ranking class. That was the goal for their son, is to be able to get them to be a senator. If you could reach that level, your family was on top and you were running shit. You know, that's just the way it was. And your daughters were always going to get the best marriages. Your sons were most likely going to follow behind you and be some high ranking something in the military, or at least be a higher level of a magistrate within the city if they didn't become a senator. So that was always the goal. And we've seen it in every society. I mean, look at how they clawed at trying to be as high as possible within Henry VIII's court. You know, it was always them, the high society born were always clawing to get as high as they could, to get as much favor as they could, get as many titles as they could. It was the same way in ancient Rome. Get as many titles, get as high as you can, get as much money as you can, get as much recognition as you can. Not everybody was born into the Julii family. Not everybody was born into the Claudio family. So those were the two most revered families within ancient Rome. If you weren't born into those families, then you basically just did what you had to do to try to get as high as you could.
And everybody was like, you know, there's similarities. The way that ancient Roman society was structured is similar to so many other civilizations with like the upper class and the lower class. The gender roles and everything. So I don't want to be too much like, oh, it's exactly like now. But I think one of the things that we have now that's a big difference from then is that there is, for some people, are able to, there's upward mobility.
Yes.
Like if somebody turns out that they were really good at sports, they're really good actor, they like they invent some app or whatever. It's like you can be thrust from the middle class up into this 1%. But in ancient Rome, it's like 100% just like, who were your parents? Who is your family? Maybe a marriage could elevate you a bit if you marry someone a bit higher, but there's no, like, you're not going to have like your Mark Zuckerberg just like emerging out of the middle class to become a billionaire. Like it's just, you're born into it or you're not. And there's no other possibility.
Yeah, and it was like that in pretty much every civilization. The ones that lucked out, it wasn't really usually a man that was able to get that upward mobility on marrying higher than his station. It was usually the woman. And a lot of times, like right now we have our upper middle class, and lower middle class. If you were a lower class plebeian, you would try to push your daughter to get up into that middle class or that upper middle class because you weren't necessarily that low class, but you weren't high either. So you start raising your daughter, even though you might have been considered a lower class, you start raising your daughter, oh, you need to learn how to sing. So you have a well modulated voice. You need to learn how to dance. So you have that poise. You need to carry yourself a certain way. You need to make sure that you're as close to being a Vestal virgin as you possibly can, because I'm going to try to marry you up higher. Obviously, they would want to try to go as high as a senator if they could, but those were that would probably be very few and far between that happened.
Unless you're like the upper middle class and you're like the most beautiful person anyone's ever seen.
That could happen, yeah.
That could happen.
That would
if you
be
just
more likely.
happen to be really beautiful. But otherwise, like, that leap would be so unlikely.
Yep. But if you could get to lower middle class to just regular middle class, that was a huge bounce up for your family's station, because families followed marriages. It doesn't happen as much now as it did back then, but it still happens a little bit now. But, if your daughter married at a higher station than what your family was, typically your family was brought up to that level with her. And it's unfortunate because they talk about the oldest daughter. She's the one that's responsible for everything. I'm the only daughter. I'm the youngest child, but I'm the only daughter. So I feel like I'm responsible for everything that happens in my family. I got to make sure everything's taken care of with my dad, so on and so forth. And so that daughter would be taught from birth that it's your responsibility to elevate this family. So you need to do X, Y, and Z to make sure you can marry higher than our current station and bring the family with you. And I think that went through centuries. I mean, that wasn't just ancient Rome. That happened through all the centuries. Even look, it was, if you watch Downton Abbey, you had women that were trying to marry into a higher station. It's always been like that, where unfortunately that burden was put on these women to try to elevate the family as a whole. And so it wasn't as hard for those women that were born at that higher level, because it was just expected. You were born at this level, you're going to marry at that level, and everything's going to be fine. That's going to keep continuing. It was those people that were the regular plebeians that were always trying to elevate to that next level that they possibly could. And unfortunately, that was always on the woman.
You mentioned the Vestal virgins. Can you explain who they were?
They were very specifically chosen.
And where were they? Which class? Does it matter where they're chosen from, or where they're from?
From what I've found, it didn't matter what your class was. You had to be picked. They obviously wouldn't go for the child of a prostitute. They probably wouldn't go that low in class, but you could be a regular plebeian. But you were chosen at an extremely young age, probably around 2 or 3 or whatever, where this was going to be your life. And then once you got to a specific age, you would be sent off to live where they live. So you'd be sequestered from everyone else. You had to put in, I think it was 30 years of service. You had to remain a virgin. You had to perform specific, basically cult-like things where, you did certain types of prayers, went to certain types of functions where it was considered to be favored by the gods to have the Vestal virgins there. They were also responsible for keeping the fire going. See, now you got me thinking about things I haven't read about in a while. But there was a certain fire. It was a fire that was dedicated to a specific goddess. I cannot think of the goddess's name, but it was their responsibility to keep that fire going, because it was said that if that fire ever went out, that was going to be the end of Rome, because then they would have no more favor from the gods, and it's just all hell would break loose.
And the Vestal virgins were they made this vow to do this for 30 years. They were sort of chosen when they were really young, but they were respected in a way that no other women were.
They ranked in a way that no other women did. I think the only people that would have ever ranked higher than them would be the empress at the time, because once Augustus became, then they started calling different women empresses. They would have been the only ones that ranked higher. They had such admiration from everyone in Rome, actually probably admiration from people outside of Rome as well, because they'd be put on such high pedestals. They would have been talked about in such reverence across the entirety of the Roman Empire that everyone would have looked at them as basically being goddesses on earth. They were supposedly some of the most beautiful women. I don't know how you can decide what a person's going to end up looking like, when they're young, but supposedly they were just these beautiful, godlike women that just could do no wrong. But their main duty was keeping the fire burning and saying the proper prayers for the wealthiest people within Rome. They obviously would have done prayers for others because, in every society back then, people would pay to have like a priest or whomever do a prayer for them. Vestal virgins would have been the same way. I did read at one time, though, that most of them, once their 30 years was done, they would retire some of the richest people in Rome because they got to keep the money that they made for the different prayers that these people would want them to do. And so they were given the option when they retired to marry or not to marry, because that was one big thing in Rome is women had to marry. You couldn't be unmarried. That was extremely frowned upon. Vestal virgins, when they retired, they did not have to marry. And from what I've read, most of them didn't.
This is like, of everything we talked about, I'm just like, I choose that. That's who I would. That's
I don't have to deal with anyone. They pay me to do a prayer.
Options,
yes,
sure. Retire age 33.
They didn't have to. They couldn't have any kids. They were not allowed to because they were not allowed to be sexually active. So, say you start at 15 or whatever to be a Vestal virgin, you're still fairly young by the time you retire. You go out there, spend your money, girl, do your thing, go buy a farm, whatever. They did not have to conform to everything else that the women in ancient Rome had to conform to. And like you said, that or a brothel owner would have been the two things.
Those are the two options. Everything you've said, I'm like, those are the two I would have gone for. And now for a quick advertising break. Taking control of your health and feeling confident in your body shouldn't feel overwhelming, but let's be real, it often does. That's where Hers comes in. They've made the process simple, supportive, and entirely online so you can start strong and stay strong from wherever you are. Hers is transforming women's healthcare by providing access to affordable weight loss treatment plans. They connect you with a medical provider who will work with you to determine the best treatment option for you. Plus, your personalized treatment ships for free directly to your door. So if you've been struggling with your weight loss journey, it's time for you to find the best option that works for you through Hers. Start your free online visit today at forhers.com/vulgar. That's forhers.com/vulgar for your personalized weight loss treatment options. Forhers.com/vulgar. Weight loss by Hers is not available everywhere. Compounded products are not approved or reviewed for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for full details, important safety information, and restrictions. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased.
It can be overwhelming to manage a business, especially when you're first starting out. Your to-do list just keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can easily begin to overrun your life. Finding the right tool not only helps you out, but can simplify problems you haven't even encountered yet. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify can help you easily build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. Shopify.com/realm. When it comes to makeup, I'm a less is more kind of person. I wish I had the patience to do a full face all the time, but since that's just how I am, I always make sure that the few products I am using are the best quality. And my go-to place to find those holy grails is Thrive Causemetics. Thrive Causemetics makes certified 100% vegan and cruelty-free products that you can depend on for everything from simple daily wear to show-stopping self-expression. And it's all made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, high-performance and trademarked formulas, and uncompromising standards. And it's beauty that gives back. For every product purchased, Thrive Causemetics makes a donation towards 8 major causes, including those impacted by cancer, homelessness, and social justice organizations. It feels good knowing that I can support a company dedicated to giving back to causes that matter to me. And it doesn't hurt that I'm a huge fan of their Liquid Lash Extensions mascara. It comes in 5 shades that last all day without clumping, smudging, or flaking. I really love that it looks like lash extensions, but you don't have to deal with the damaging glue or salon prices. Plus, at the end of the day, it slides right off with warm water and a washcloth. No soap required. So there's no wonder why it has over 40,000 5-star reviews, including mine. Try your new trusty favorites with an exclusive set for our listeners. New customers can get the Liquid Lash Extensions mascara and a mini-sized brilliant eye brightener at a special set price with free shipping, available at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. Or save more with 20% off your first order at thrivecosmetics.com/thrive. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/thrive for 20% off your first order.
9 años pidiendo el Snack Wrap. Aquí tienes tu Snack Wrap. ¿Tú quieres un Snack Wrap? Toma tu Snack Wrap. ¿Tú también? Toma un Snack Wrap. Snack Wrap, Snack Wrap, Snack Wrap. Volvió el Snack Wrap. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And we're back. But I guess, and we don't need to get into the specifics, but like ancient, like the millions of people who live there, it's like, I'm saying like, yeah, Vestal Virgin, that's what I choose. But it's like, if there's like, I don't know, 2 million people in a city, they choose like 6 to be the Vestal Virgins.
Yes.
Like your chances are not good
Not
being
at all.
chosen. Yeah.
And the funny thing is you mentioned that about how many people live there. I don't think people really understand just how densely populated the city of Rome was. Yes, the empire itself was quite vast. So they had millions and millions of people that were part of ancient Rome. But when you look at the actual city of Rome, man, I can't imagine living in that close of proximity to others because they were really just smushed in there. And if they didn't have the sewer systems that they did, that city would not have lasted long at all. I mean, because it was probably even bad enough even with the sewer systems. So it's just, there were so many people, and that's what gets me. And that's what a lot of governments have done over the years is there's so few of them that are in the government and so many that are not in the government. But like I said earlier, if you beat something into someone's head from day one, long enough and hard enough, they're going to believe that. And they had these millions of people living in the city that believed, I can't do this. I can't do this because these people that are in charge have told me I can't. Just like my brother mentioned to me once, I was flying down the freeway because we were late and I was going way faster than I should have. And he said, what amazes me is how we are all so conditioned to stay within these lines. We don't veer outside of those lines when we're driving. It doesn't matter how fast we're going, we stay within those lines. He's like, what? Who's keeping us from getting outside of those lines? No one. It's all in our heads. Granted, I wouldn't want to veer out because I was going fast and that could have been a really bad car crash. But he's right. We are taught to stay within the lines in driving, in our lives, in how we speak, whatever. And all those people in ancient Rome, they were taught, stay within your lane, stay in your lane, or you're going to be punished. I have no doubt that just like in today's world, there was a whole lot of bullshit going on that didn't get noticed by people. Whole lot of crime, whatever. But for the most part, the vast majority stayed within their lane. And that's how you keep control of 1 million people in one small little city.
Well, and part of it, I'm going to guess, just because of the person we're going to talk to in the next episode. Like once you start getting into like, this is the emperor, like, oh, he's a god. like if you look up at your leaders and this imperial family as gods on earth, basically, like they're named gods after they die, it's like, well, why would you ever do something like if your leaders are seen as so all powerful to you, then like of course you would do it. Like that's, I would imagine, part of where, because of the, can you explain about just sort of like the spirituality? Like they were a very superstitious, like they took gods and stuff very literally in this culture.
A lot. I want to say that didn't start fading until other countries started fighting back against Rome and gaining their independence. But, if you look at Egyptians, if you look at Greeks, if you look at any of them, the Danish, all of them, they really, to me, it always boiled down to they had no other way of explaining natural occurrences, so they turned them into gods. Thor, god of thunder. You can't explain thunder in 300 BC, so you're going to come up with a god that's going to explain why there's a bunch of rumbling above my head. So they put so much emphasis on religion in ancient Rome. I mean, they had altars to gods and goddesses in their homes, just like they did in other ancient civilizations. They would make sacrifices to them. They would go and pay people like the Vestal Virgins and other priests within the city to have specific prayers for things. If for some reason a woman couldn't get pregnant, she would make sacrifices and go pay to have specific priests pray over her womb, hopefully to help conceive. And they also felt like if there was ever any calamity in their life, it was because they didn't give proper homage to their gods and goddesses. And, you would even find different things throughout the city, different statues that everyone could go to and just leave things at the altar and pray to it, where you wouldn't have to specifically go to a priest. It was more the rich people that thought that if I go to this priest and they do this prayer for me, then I'm more likely going to get what it is I'm praying for than if I just went to the altar that's sitting in the middle of the square where anyone can go to. So they really felt that their lives were really based on number one, how well were they living their lives? Were they abiding by the rules? Was the wife being as pious as possible? And two, were we giving proper sacrifices to these gods and goddesses? Because they had a pantheon of gods and goddesses just like everyone else did. There was not one monotheistic god thought process with them, which is why they kind of butted heads a little bit with Herod, because that was Christianity. They believed in the one God. And so there was that tension there with dealing with these other countries that were more to Christianity than they were the pantheon of gods. But they truly believed that if they didn't do what they were told these gods wanted them to do. And that's another thing. Who decided what these gods did? I mean, that had to come at some point in their history.
Who decided what the gods want and what will please them? Like someone. And so that was some
guy sitting somewhere, because it wasn't a woman. There was some guy somewhere that said, you know what, this is happening. I'm going to call it this god. This is what they're in charge of, and this is what they require from you. And so that's another thing. Religion, however you want to take that, is something that is beat into people's heads from day one, and this is what you have to abide by. And they really believed that if you didn't abide by that it was going to be the downfall of Rome.
And it was really like the religion was so caught up with the politics and with the city. Like it was all like there's no separation of church and state. Like it's all one thing. And I'm just assuming that's part of like how you keep everybody in line, because everybody follows this religion. And the people in charge are the ones who are being like, this is the God we've offended. Here's how you can please him. And everyone takes that literally and seriously.
And that's one thing that people in charge have always tried to use to their benefit. I'm not even going to speak on how it's happening now, but they always try to use religion to control the people they think are starting to get out of hand. So this senator makes a certain decree. I want this, and this to happen. And that goes along with what this God so-and-so wants us to do. And we know that we need to please the gods, because if we don't, there's going to be destruction on Rome. So based on our religious belief, you need to go along with this new law, this new rule that I want to implement, because that's what's going to please this God. And everyone is so stuck on trying to be as religiously correct as they could. They followed along with whatever the senators were telling them to do. And religion has always been used as a weapon against the lower classes. It just has. I mean, whether you want to say left, right, this, that, it doesn't matter. Religion has always been used to try to keep control of the lower classes. And they were probably a bit more dogmatic about it than what we are now, because they really believed it in a different way than we do now, you know?
Well, and just in terms of like, just a couple examples I came across when I was doing my research, like, just in terms of what I would consider now like a superstition, they took so seriously. They're just like, okay, you know, should we go to war with this country or not? I don't know. Let's go see how many eggs the chicken lays over there. Count the eggs. Oh no, one of them is brown. That means this.
Yep.
Like, these were the sorts of, they're like, oh my God, a bird just like shit on that statue and it covered up these letters. These letters are left. What do those letters spell? Like, this is how they're making like enormous decisions just based on like how many birds just flew past. Like,
but then you also have, okay, the people that would interpret these signs.
Yes,
you had very specific
right,
people that interpret it, because you had, you know, Octavian, later on Augustus, he had his specific people that he would go to for interpretations for things, just like people in other civilizations be like, let's read what the bones say. So they throw the bones out and see. It's all about who's doing the interpreting. What is their goal? Are they being paid by whomever to say, oh, this is what the gods want to the masses that have gathered? Or are they really giving the interpretation that they feel they're getting? 9 times out of 10, they were getting paid to say whatever it was the person that paid them wanted them to say. So
or like if like Octavius, like if Augustus is the one who's like, what does my horoscope say? Like, you're not going to say something that's going to make him kill you.
Exactly.
You're going to say what you know he wants you to say.
Right. So all of these omens and signs and all that, it was just natural occurrences of life. But you were so deeply rooted in religion, you felt that it had to have a meaning. And then you had these people that somehow worked their way up in the system to be the ones that will give you the interpretation. And they were getting paid to give you the interpretation the powers that be wanted them to give. So it's just like, really, really, what is the truth? Do we really know what truth is? I mean, as human beings, do we really know what truth is? Because, like you said, whoever was writing the history, they were writing it based off of how they viewed it. The people that were translating from one language to the other, they were writing it the way they viewed it. What is the actual truth?
You're so right. Because like, if you look at like one of these writers, like Tacitus or whatever, he's like, yeah. And so my like example I made up, but it's this sort of thing. Honestly, it's like, okay, you know, should we go to war? Let's see how many eggs does the hen lay. And it's like, and then the seer said, because one egg was brown, we should do this. And, you know, Tacitus writes that down. But like, why did the seer say that? He didn't write down why the seer said that. He didn't write down who's paying the seer, or like the seer has like personal grudge against that country and wants to go to war against them. Like, that we don't have. We just know. So we're like, oh, okay. So I guess I just took this seriously, where it's like, no, everyone has motivations. No one's just saying something for no reason.
Yep. And, you know, it's funny because they had such a huge group of gods and goddesses. And the thing that always gets me, and it's sort of this way in Egypt as well, and Greece, but the vast majority of the supreme deities that were worshipped were women. I mean, you had a couple of guys that were, you know, high ranking in the pantheon of gods. But for the most part, the ones that were worshipped the most were women. The ones that they would go to when they were seeking advice for whatever was usually always a woman. Yet women were the ones that were considered to be beneath the men. How does that work? How are you praying to all these women, but yet you hold these women in such low regard? The women that are like right in front of you that can physically do things for you, because you're not guaranteed these goddesses are listening to your dumbass. You're not guaranteed they're going to give you what you're asking for. These women are right in front of you that can give you what you're asking for if you ask nicely. And you're still saying you're beneath me. That is one thing about males that I will never understand.
Can we pivot to talk about something that I'm really excited to talk to you about that you brought to my attention, which is female gladiators?
There's a lot of mixed feelings on did they exist, didn't they exist. But ultimately, I think enough evidence has been found where they did exist. The reason I think why people try to suppress their existence so much is because think about what we've been saying about women, how they needed to be girly girls, they needed to be subservient, they needed to be this, that, and the other. A female gladiator is going to kick your ass. She ain't listening to anything you have to say, and she's making money doing it. So I think that's why they try to suppress them so much. There weren't as many of them as regular gladiators, obviously. But in my research, I found that male gladiators had existed for hundreds of years before the first women ever started doing it. I don't know what would have caused them to start doing it. I'm pretty sure there were plenty of little girls that saw it and was like, ooh, I want to do that.
I feel like I'm going to hypothesize based on a video I watched that you sent me. But I think if you've been, it's like, this is gladiators. And, like, I'm sure people are familiar with the concept, but, like, it's these two men fighting, usually to the death, in front of an audience of people who are just like super hype and excited. But eventually it's just like, this is getting stale. This is like, we need, so that's what they start bringing animals into it. So eventually I can see it just like, let's bring women. Like, it's like, how can we get people, like, it's just the same old show. Like, we need to get some new energy. So I feel like that's where the potentially female gladiators came from, where it's just like, we need people, not as many people are coming to watch our fights. Like, how can we get the audience back? Like, and at first I think that would be shocking. In this culture we've been talking about, like, people just be like, what? A female gladiator? Like, that, everyone's like driving in the lines. They're just like, men are like this, women are like this. And then just like a female, like, it would be so explosive and so controversial. Like, that would get people to go to your Coliseum.
Yeah. And it wouldn't be high-ranking women either. It wouldn't be high society women that would do it, because they would feel something like that was beneath them, number one, but just so outside of what you should actually be doing with your life, being a woman of virtue and whatnot. So it was likely poor women, maybe even slaves that they had doing this. There's not a lot of information on the women, the specific women that were gladiatrix. But yeah, it was one of those things that I watched the video I sent you, and I don't know if they existed before, but Trajan is the one Emperor Trajan was the one known to really implement the female gladiators. And if you know anything about Trajan, he was really considered to be the most think outside of the box emperors in the entirety of the Roman Empire. He's considered to be one of the best too, one of the most fair. I don't think I've ever really read too many bad things about Trajan. So he might not have liked it, because I'm pretty sure he had the same view of women that everyone else did. They needed to be sewing my clothes and raising my kids. But he also understood that you can't lose the backing of these 1 million+ people living in the city. And if they're screaming that they need something more in these city-sanctioned games that you're giving them, and they're tired of seeing just a bunch of brutes going at each other, you got to implement something different. And someone must have come to him with the idea of, well, how about we put some women out there? And he was like, fine, just don't make them one of the high-class women and we'll be okay. And I'm pretty sure those fights would have been just as interesting as the guys' fights, because there were so many different types of gladiators. I don't know that they would have had that many for the women. They probably just gave them just one type.
One like fighting style.
Yeah. Where you go out there with a shield, a sword, and maybe a helmet. Maybe they didn't even give the women helmets. I don't know. Because there was like tons of different types for men. And a lot of it revolved around what region that you come from, as what type of gladiator they would teach you to be. Also, it probably wouldn't have been very safe for women to be at a ludus. If any of you were wondering what a ludus is a gladiator school. And it is run by a lanista. And it would be very unsafe for a woman to be around a bunch of brutes like that. And with no protection, she would constantly have to be fighting just to survive, really, because they would take her food rations, they would beat the crap out of her any chance they got, because they wouldn't believe that a woman belonged there. So it would be dangerous on so many fronts to be a female gladiator. So if a woman actually chose to get into that profession, more power to her, because that would have been hard.
I am under the understanding that oftentimes, like, gladiator fights, like, it's like, let's watch these people fight, or let's watch this man fight the lion or whatever. But often they would be sort of reenacting famous stories.
Yes.
They'd be reenacting like myths, but also like legendary battles that the Romans had done, that they'd been involved with. So one of the concepts that was in that video, I'll link to the video in the show notes so people know what we're talking about. But they suggested, because it was probably like 10 or 20 years after Boudica had like raised an army in the British Isles to try and depose Rome, like perhaps like it was 10 or 20 years after that there's evidence that there was female gladiators like in London, which was a Roman place at the time. So like, could they just be like, we've encountered, or I think they also talked about, female fighters from like what is now Russia. Like the Roman armies have been encountering female fighters. So this is kind of like, this is their YouTube. Like this is their news of the day. They're just like, I want to see a reenactment of this thing I heard that happened. And if the thing that happened involved a woman fighter, then you have to get a female gladiator to represent that in the Colosseum, I guess.
I know one thing I found interesting, and I think it was in one of the videos I watched, where they were talking about married women that were going to be gladiators. And the first thing I thought was, what kind of wimp was that guy to where she could be like, screw you, I'm going to be a gladiator. I mean, because she would have to be pretty tough to be able to get into the arena in the first place. And so did she like beat his ass and say I was going, or did she just threaten to beat his ass? I mean, what kind of guy? I mean, how would he go to the bar with his friends and be like, yeah, my wife's a gladiator?
Like in the civilization we've described, where men have complete power over their wives and women are so powerless, like the husband would have to agree to this.
He would.
A woman couldn't just do this.
And I mean, her family would have felt a bunch of shame because women didn't do stuff like this. So most likely she'd be disowned. I mean, it would be a complete shift in her entire world to get into something like this. So if a woman chose to do it, there would be a lot she'd have to take under consideration before doing that. So that is what makes me believe that, I mean, because there were even men that chose to do it. They weren't all slaves. So there were men that chose to do it for monetary reasons, or they just had way too much testosterone, whoever knows. But
somehow, like, it has to seem like a better option than what you're currently doing. It
exactly.
has to, so your life has to be a step up from whatever your situation is.
I wouldn't want to have to fight for my life on a regular basis, because let's be honest, not as many fights ended in death as what people assume. Everyone always thought that it was absolutely a fight to the death, and it wasn't. You had the option to raise your finger and surrender, and then it would be up to the emperor to decide if you lived or died. A lot of times they would let them live and then they bring them back for another fight, probably kill them in that one, but not everyone died in these. But one wrong move and you're dead. You know, whether you had a chance to surrender or not, that's a completely different subject. You are always going to get to that point in the fight where you can surrender. You take your eyes off that person just slightly, or they kick some sand in your face, you can't see it, and boom, you're dead. So to make the choice to get into that, you're right. How bad do things have to be for you to choose to put yourself in that position?
Where that seems like a better option. And actually, this leads me into another thing I wanted to talk to you about, and maybe this will be sort of like the final part of this conversation, is their view of death was interesting to me. It's very different because I think because of this like genuine religious belief, they weren't just like, this is it. Like death was very much not the end for them. But so I mean, like when I imagine going to see a gladiator fight that ends in death, like I was just like, I would not do that. That sounds horrifying. The same as like going to see a bullfight or something. I'm like, I don't want to watch a person or an animal being killed in front of me for fun.
Right.
But if you're in a culture where death is kind of not the end, and where it's also, there's so many stories of people like Cleopatra and Mark Antony who end up dying by suicide, and that's seen as honorable. Like, what have you come across in your reading just about how they viewed death?
Well, you know, it's just like the Vikings. If you died in battle, you know, the Valkyrie would come and get you. They all glorified death, the life beyond. You know, same with the Egyptians. You go to the field of reeds where you live happily ever after, where you brought all your slaves with you to feed you grapes and everything while you spent eternity in glory. And pretty much every religion has been like that. I mean, Christianity is the same way. Although we have a heaven and hell, they didn't really think about, they believed that there was an underworld that was not all that great to be in, but still, they always automatically assumed, because they always felt that they were right about everything, they always assumed they were going to what we would consider heaven. And so, when a person died, their funerals would, if they were, higher class, the funerals would be a big spectacle. They'd have their death mask made, and they'd have a bust of themselves made, and it would be put in the homes of their family, and their family would they would look at these with such reverence, and they would make the sacrifices to the gods and the goddesses to ensure that this family member that they felt was in heaven would continue to live out the rest of eternity in whatever posh world they thought that they were sitting in. And so they never really viewed them as being gone. In today's world, we'll say, oh, I have an angel watching over me. They kind of felt the same way that way. They didn't verbalize it as an angel, but they would say that, the ancestors of the family were looking after the rest of the family to ensure that.
I was going to say, like, people say that today, like about like the ancestors,
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the way they viewed it. It's just you were physically gone, but you weren't spiritually gone. And so, with the gladiators, they would look at it as fine, I died a heroic death. I died an honorable death. I'm going on to where whatever Vestal Virgin died is going to be there feeding me grapes and and fanning me with a big palm leaf kind of thing. They always viewed that when they died, they were going to go to this grand place. And so people just didn't fear death the way we do now, because we look at things a little bit more scientifically. And it's like, okay, what actually happens to us? Where do we go? Is it just done? Or are we just sitting in total darkness the rest of eternity? They didn't look at it that way. They looked at it as you went on to this grand place, and your spirit popped in here and there to help the family out, to keep the family fortune going, or whatever it was they felt that your spirit was doing. So that's probably why, Romans were debaucherous. They just were. I mean, let's just put that out there.
Yeah.
So they had no problem with watching bloody, nasty things happening out on the floor of the arena. But they also viewed it as, that person dies in the arena, man, the way they're going to get glorified, the way they're going to go on to this great life. So I want him to die because I want him to have that afterlife. I mean, that's
like a happy ending for the whole audience. But I wondered too, like, there was so much, I'm going to say, like, casual death, like, especially just from what I've been reading about what we're going to talk in the next episode, listeners, during the reign of Augustus. But just kind of like, that guy looked at me funny, cut off his head right now. Like, there's so much, just like, people were just being casually murdered. And so if you're living in it, and cities are being like ransacked, like army, like, this is a society of people who, seeing death in the Colosseum is probably not the first time any of them saw somebody die. Like, people, there's like plagues, there's like everything, like there's death all around them all the time. So like, to me, living in like Canada, the thought of going to a Colosseum with a bunch of strangers and watching somebody murder somebody is like insane. I can't even quantify it. But it's like, if you're living in a place where there's death constantly everywhere, then like making death a spectacle where there is this kind of happy ending is a way to sort of control it. Or I don't know, just all these traumatized people working through.
Another thing that I've thought about a lot often, and I don't know why, since there was such a death toll really throughout all of history, because, you could die from an ear infection, look at the Dauphin of France, you die from anything back then. And so how often did it happen where a 2 or 3 year old, who both parents got the plague or whatever, and now this 2-year-old sitting in the street, and they get taken in by a completely different family. They're raised to believe that that's their family, that's their family name. How often did that happen throughout history, where someone from this family ends up in this family, just like, all the illegitimate children of rulers, they would get cast aside, raised by someone else with a completely different name, where they're actually of royal blood, but yet they were raised on the street by someone or whatever. So how often did something like that happen, where since there was just so much death around, any kind of sickness could kill you, any kind of anything could kill you. You could get some tainted wheat and next thing you know, you're dead. The rats could have got in there or whatever. And all of a sudden, you're a part of a completely different family, and that lineage keeps going. So really, it's like, that's always kind of gotten me where technically we're probably all related in some way. Because who knows?
No, when you look at the family tree written out, it's like, this is the mother, and this is the father, and this is the kid. And it's like, but was that the father?
Yeah, exactly.
Was that the mother?
And you couldn't tell back then because there was a lot of death happening. Just either, like you said, someone didn't like the way they looked, so they slit your throat, or you just died because you didn't have enough food, or you died because you ate some rotten food. Just, you never know what was going to happen back then. And so you're right. People would be accustomed to seeing death all around them at all times. But how did it really affect some of these kids in actual family dynamics of who ended up being in what family? It's almost impossible to say.
Well, and that is going to lead us very beautifully into part 2 of our conversation, which will be in the next episode, listeners. But I think some of what I've been thinking about and reading is, what effect does that have on you when you're growing up in a society where, if you don't understand thunder and lightning, and you don't understand, why is the river flooded or whatever, why is this plague happening? You're like, well, it must be the gods must be displeased. And how does that affect you when you're in the imperial family? But then also, if you want to have a measure of control, if you don't want to think everything is just random, we're living in olden days, and anyone could, then you think oh, it must be a conspiracy. Somebody must be murdering all these people. That's where people start to kind of, and these are the historians, right?
Yep.
200 years later are like, the sequence of people all died. And it's like, yes, there was a plague, and yes, there was the bad wheat, and yes, but it's like, but what if there was a serial killer? And those are the sources we're looking at, right? Where you're like, or was it just a really shitty time to live?
Yep.
Anyway, we're going to be getting more into sources next time, because we're going to be talking about Livia, who was technically the first empress of Rome. And we'll explain how and why that happened in the next episode. And Gina is going to be here along with me next time. So get ready. So, as we said in the episode, stay tuned for a special episode coming out in 2 days on Friday, where Gina is back now that we've sort of laid the landscape of what life was like in ancient Rome, especially for women. We're going to get into the story of Livia, who I, previously to doing the research that I did for this upcoming episode, I mostly just knew as the iconic villainess in the 1976 BBC miniseries I, Claudius, which I was very all about a few months ago. It's interesting to see what her real life story is actually like. So stay tuned for that special extra episode with Gina coming up on Friday. And I do also want to mention that I have written a book. It's coming out next year. It's called Rebel of the Regency, The Scandalous Saga of Caroline of Brunswick, Britain's Uncrowned Queen, or potentially Britain's Queen Without a Crown. We keep going back and forth, but it's for sure called Rebel of the Regency. It is by me, Anne Foster. And you can pre-order it if you're in Canada and the US at your local independent bookstore. Just go in and be like, hey, I'd like to pre-order a copy of Rebel of the Regency by Anne Foster. You can also pre-order it by going to any of the major online retailers. I have a list of all of them at rebeloftheregency.com. That's rebeloftheregency.com. You can go there to click through to order a copy of this book. It's so important to get people to pre-order the book, because that's how bookstores know that people are interested in it. That's how bookstores know to order more copies of it so that other people can buy it. So I know every author with every book is always like, man, pre-orders are important. But now I too am an author, and I now understand why pre-orders are important. And if you're just excited about it in general, you can also add it on your to-be-read list on Goodreads or on Storygraph. That also is valuable and important and shows the enthusiasm for this book. And also, if and when you pre-order it, you can sign up to get some free treats from me. For anyone who shares their receipt for having pre-ordered my book with me, then you can sign up to get a free 1-year membership to my Patreon, a free 1-year membership to my Substack, and also a beautifully designed Carolina, Brunswick themed digital paper doll sheet that is incredibly cute. So anyway, the link to do that, to submit your receipt, is also at rebeloftheregency.com. And we're talking about ancient Rome, and so I have to bring up our brand partner, Common Era Jewelry, which is a woman-owned small business based out of the United States that uses 100% recycled gold and makes all their pieces made to order, which means there is no waste when you place an order. They make the items, so there's not lots sitting around being unused. Their pieces are made in New York City, so everyone involved has healthcare and good wages. Even the packaging is made by a lovely little family-owned business in Chicago. And what connects with this week's episode is that their pieces are all inspired by ancient history, and several of them have connections to ancient Rome. So for instance, they have gorgeous pieces like pendants and or rings featuring some women of ancient Rome, including Livia, who we'll be talking about on Friday, as well as Agrippina the Younger, as well as Boudica, the woman from Britain who burned down London and was against the Romans. So if you're like anti-Roman, you can also get the Boudica design as well. But also some other pieces they have with some ancient Roman vibes. For instance, there's a ring that says Liberi Vivas, which is an ancient Roman saying that means may you live carefree. And it's inspired by an actual ancient ring that was actually found. So you can just walk around, cosplay, pretend like you're an ancient Roman times person. They also have a Palma Slim signet ring, which features a palm frond. And in ancient Rome, palm fronds were awarded to victorious gladiators. You can wear that, walk around, cosplay like you're a victorious gladiator. There's also a pendant and a ring that you can get featuring what's known as the magic sator square, which is a word puzzle that was first unearthed in the archaeological remnants of the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. And if you're all about the Vestal Virgins, there is also a design featuring the Vestal Virgins. The design of the Common Era piece is based on a Roman coin that depicted the Vestals sacrificing at the Temple of Vesta. So you can get all of your ancient Roman vibes from Common Era Jewelry. Their pieces are available in solid gold as well as in more affordable gold vermeil. Vulgar History listeners can always get 15% off all items from Common Era by going to commonera.com/vulgar. and or using code VULGAR at checkout. That's 15% off at Common Era at commonera.com/vulgar. And we're going to be back in 2 days on Friday talking about Livia with everyone's fave, Gina Berry. So until then, everybody, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Ann Foster. That's me. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon for as low as $1 a month at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans, and for everyone else at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod and get in touch with me via email at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.
You might think you know fairy tales, and you might think that they are cute and sweet and boring. But the real Grimm fairy tales were not cute at all. They were very dark, and they were often very grim. On Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest, we tell a Grimm fairy tale to a bunch of kids. Perfect for car rides or screen-free entertainment, Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest activates kids' imaginations and instigates fun conversations. Because fairy tales speak to all of us at a very deep, primal level, and they raise interesting topics and questions that are worth chewing over together as a family. Every episode is rated Grim, Grimmer, or Grimmest, so you, your kids, your whole family can choose what is the right level of grim for you. Though, if you're listening with Grandma, she's just gonna go for Grimmest. Trust me on this one. Tune in to Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest, and our new season, available now.
Does music really have the power to heal? How can you instantly be more persuasive? What would the world be like if there were no bugs? These are the kind of topics we explore in every episode of my podcast called Something You Should Know. My name is Mike Carruthers, and what we do on Something You Should Know is we find leading experts and curate topics that will impact your life, satisfy your curiosity, or simply fascinate you, maybe all of the above. Out of all the millions of podcasts in the universe, Something You Should Know is usually ranked in the top 200 of all podcasts on Apple. A lot of people like Something You Should Know, and I'm willing to bet you will too. We deliver 3 episodes a week and have a catalog of over 1,000 shows for you to listen to. Give a listen to Something You Should Know, wherever you get your podcasts.
American history is full of infamous tales that continue to captivate audiences decades or even hundreds of years after they happened. On the Infamous America podcast, you'll hear the true stories of the Salem witch trials and the escape attempts from Alcatraz, of bank robbers like John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd, of killers like Lizzie Borden and Charles Starkweather, of mysteries like the Black Dahlia and D.B. Cooper, and of events that inspired movies like Goodfellas, Killers of the Flower Moon, Zodiac, 8 Men Out, and many more. I'm Chris Wimmer. Join me as we crisscross the country from the Miami drug wars and Dixie Mafia in the South, to mobsters in Chicago and New York, to arsonists, kidnappers, and killers in California, to unsolved mysteries in the heartland and in remote corners of Alaska. Every episode features narrative writing and cinematic music, and there are hundreds of episodes available to binge. Find Infamous America wherever you get your podcasts.